Warm greetings. Welcome to all of you for another session of Friday Waters.Theses Club. The idea of Friday Waters is to wet the Fridays with fun-filled and yet fruitful activities for the future generation. Friday Waters has water talkies, book reading, thesis club, which is today, and the water arts. The focus of the Water Thesis Club is on bringing the students or scholars who have done or are doing thesis alias research on water matters to the session in order to discuss with them the making of the thesis or their research and the issues around the subject they have tried to cover and the way they are struggling or enjoying in the work. My name is Mansee Bal Bhargava, and I'm the moderator and the discussant for today's Thesis Club session. For today, we have Priyanka Kanhare to share her research on impact of riverfront development on ecology of riverine landscape. And the case study is of Sabarmati River. We both hail from Ahmedabad, and we have the river, famous river called Sabarmati, and we are going to discuss that. Before I invite Priyanka for her presentation today, let me just give a quick introduction of her work so far. Priyanka is an academician, researcher, and a practicing landscape architect. Currently, she is a visiting faculty at the Faculty of Architecture, SEPT University, Ahmedabad, and at School of Environment, Design and Architecture, Navratna University, Vadodara. Her academic interest lies in areas connecting architecture and nature, where she connects research and design through varied studio exercises and on-field assignments. She holds keen interest in mapping urban biodiversity for various institutional campuses, parks, and gardens. Simultaneously, she is also pursuing her PhD in landscape architecture from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Her research aims at assessing the impact that urban development has on natural systems such as rivers and how a framework can be developed to assess ecological importance of these natural systems, which leads to designing of sustainable urban inserts. So welcome Priyanka for agreeing to do this session with us and also explain to us what's going on with Sabarmati and how do you really theorize many aspects of urban ecology. So you will get a time of 20 to 25 minutes to make your presentation, and then we will start the Q&A session on your presentation. So welcome once again, and thank you so much for agreeing. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mansee. Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'd like to start by thanking Mansee and her team for inviting me for the W for W session. I'd also like to thank my guide, Dr. Aarti Grover, for guiding me through this research, and it's her guidance that has actually led to encouraging this stage of work that I have reached. I'll share my screen.
Yes.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, sure. So, landscapes around the world express a long association between people and the natural environment. They are the manifestations of nature and human collaborative efforts. Comparing cultural perception and ecological function is a misconception, which was quoted by Nosher back in 1995 and then 97, and this mistake tends to confuse people, especially government officials, bureaucrats, and designers. They misinterpret that ecological quality means where landscape look only natural. Riverine landscapes in India reflect physical, biological, and cultural personalities of everyday life and have deeper association with people compared to any other natural system. They are manifestations of a type of landscape that represent local identity caused by natural factors and cultural factors. The relationship between water and the city is often problematic as it separates yet unites high-quality natural systems from urban sprawl. The mediation of land-water systems have been identified as a point of hybrid, how natural systems are integrated with urban development activities and initiatives. Today, the developmental approach towards land-water mediation is greatly influenced by the political system in which we operate, the economic use we see for land, our aesthetic preferences, and our social conventions. An integrated approach to managing such landscapes is not a new concept. Over centuries, traditional communities have developed practices and techniques to use ecological processes and resources and not to exploit them so that there is scope for revival. River edges are these boundaries or transitions from one ecosystem to another and often exhibit high level of species richness and biodiversity. Let's look at some of the traditional approaches and practices which prevailed along the riverine landscape as traditional knowledge systems. And this is the point from where my inquiry about the way we look at these riverine landscapes today has changed. Riverfront development is defined as the development of land or area along a river, modification of land water mediation, or development on area or land next to a river. The economic and historic significance of many cities speak of the glorious waters in their proximity. Some of the old waterfront development projects in India included the Pondicherry Marine Drive, the activities along the Chennai and Ganga Ghats in Varanasi, and uh, the transport and religious activities which were planned in Vijayawada. Here we can see example of Saihu Lake Basin of a small town called Fay, which hosted an ancient agrarian society and was popular for its silk production. The society was the phenomenon of teamwork and clear labor division made them a very sustainable practice. The main part of the work was done in groups and they adapted to the bioengineering techniques which have been mentioned here. The traditional as well as sustainable practices adopted along the riverbank and edges have shown improved situation even post its execution. Landscape manifests patterns and processes. Patterns can be categorized as the geographical settings or approaches, while processes can be identified as an ecological approach with landscape ecology. Thus, the future of design is independent on how well these interact. One of the prominent approaches that one could see was in the Chicago Shoreline Project back in 1970s. Here, the proposal for ecological restoration of the site began, where restoration was seen as a procedure where academic research and hands-on practice coped with ignorance and surprise, fed each other, and got refined in the process. The, lo- the lower river Skijum in Denmark historically contained a large variation in habitats, and the river ran through large areas with wetlands, many backwaters, islands, and oxbow lakes. It was in 1960 that this river was channelized and narrowed, and the wetland was completely drained off. A reference of it is what we can see in these two Google Earth maps. During 2001 and 2002, a restoration project was conceptualized and carried out, which transformed this channelized river into again a meandering river. Another example is of a 15-year long project, the revitalization of Ari River in Switzerland. For this project, the old riverbed was not replaced. Instead, an additional canal was developed alongside it. It was the rain-fed canal, which transformed into linear public space, where visitors could become a part of this recreated natural system. There was always a reference for people as to what was the old river canal and what was the new river canal. The LA River project in Los Angeles, the River Thames project in London under the London River Action Plan, and the projects on arms of Free River in Berlin are a few such other examples where ecological restoration and management was successfully carried out. I would like to draw your attention specifically to the LA River project, where the natural edge of the river or the mediation that I described earlier was maintained and the embankment or development was done, keeping this edge at least one side of it as natural. Similarly, in the Rooms for Netherlands project, there were smaller lands which were cut out, and water was allowed to swale and move in different directions, and hence newer ecology started getting established. Today in India, a river restoration project, like for instance the Ganga restoration project, begins with a focus of integral to sustaining a riverine ecosystem in establishing the value of water, where water is merely looked upon as a resource or an economic value. On the other hand, small NGOs have been working towards successful river rejuvenation projects like the Vedavati River in Chikmagalur Taluka of Karnataka and the Kunduvati River in Bangalore, which also involve community participation and sustainable approaches, which have resulted in increasing the water level, water quality, character of the riparian vegetation, although at a very primary stage, soil erosion, etc. One of the most talked about and successful riverfront development projects is the Yamuna Biodiversity Park project. This park was planned with the primary focus of homing diversity of forest communities, biologically rich wetlands, grassland communities, etc. Through this park, it was possible to re-establish and regrow the native flora and fauna that used to exist many decades ago and then became extinct locally. Riverfront development activity alters the morphology of the river. This changes and impacts community dynamics and biodiversity along the riverine landscape. The area of impact ranges anywhere between 0 to 10 square kilometers, which is mainly the land-water mediation edge and the vegetation till the upland. It is this edge where the river swales, deposits sediments, and keeps the ecological processes going. These are extremely important aspects when it comes to assessing the life and health of a river system. Anthropogenic activities which alter riverine landscapes could be broadly categorized under sociocultural practices, geological movements and processes, and technological development. What is important here is that sociocultural practices happen or basically are planned along the river at such duration, which leaves a lot of scope uh, for the river to swale and to revive by itself. Geological timeline activities are something which are out of our scope and we can really not do much about it. But the technological development activities, they are subject to far more visible changes and they specifically depend on our plans and action. Of these, the major alterations is caused by these developmental activities like damming, riverfront development, change in surface hydrology, rail networks, road constructions, etc. Many researchers have extensively worked and researched along Indian rivers and have mentioned their findings that in India, floodplain habitats are threatened by overgrazing, deforestation, land reclamation, and agriculture. River Ganga has lost almost 80% of its original forest cover in the river basin. Riparian forests adjoining the rivers and streams of the primary, secondary, and the tertiary streams have been entirely eliminated outside the protected areas. Several other rivers have lost their perenniality because of the damages done to the catchments and riparian areas, and Sabarmati River is one of such examples. In India, rivers have been understood as ecosystems but are treated simply as conduits of water. These findings were mainly out of the literature review and extensive research that has been written by prominent researchers. It is important to also highlight and understand the terminologies that associated with this research, and that is how the title basically got formed. And it is understanding the core of each of these terms that helps us to understand that how we exploit these definitions. The quest for how anthropogenic practices alter riverine landscapes, impacting the ecological processes, forms the basic thrust of my research, and it was also one of the identified research gaps. In the most developing countries, the now remaining natural floodplains are disappearing at an accelerating rate. This is a visual indication of Sabarmati River, which is flowing across Ahmedabad. Most common patterns of alteration that one can evidently observe are modification of the riparian edge, reduction in species diversity, increase of non-native species, isolations of habitat, reduction in level of tolerance to change, shift in the community structure, introduction of sewage water into the real river, into the good river or rain-fed water, which eventually has damaged and made it almost intolerable to stand along these banks. These are the few aerial images of the change in the parts which are just above the riverfront, that is on the left. The actual part where the riverfront has been executed, and the parts which are in the, sorry, the part on the left is the lower part of the riverfront. The central image is where the riverfront actually lies, and the one on the extreme right is the upstream of this particular riverfront project. These images show how transformation of water flow and vegetation patterns have happened all the way from 1980s to 2020s. One can observe a lot of additional swales being created because of the barrication of water, and the floodplain areas or the extent in which the river swales and floods have increased tremendously into the parts which are in the lower or the downstream areas after the riverfront towards the Gulf of Khambhat. While these patterns are not very evidently seen in the parts which are in the upstream of the Sabarmati riverfront. When development happens in small stretches of river, in this case, in case of the 23-kilometer long riverfront project at Sabarmati, new ecology gets created, but it is completely man-made. This I'm referring to the part in which the riverfront project has actually been executed, and may or may not sustain by itself. What this development does is that it impacts the entire river ecology, which is almost a 371 to 78 kilometers long river. It changes and creates newer patterns in areas immediately above and below the riverfront. What it also what it also does is that it builds up an image of a riverfront, which is associated with a river which is almost 400 kilometers long. So it is impressionizing a 23-kilometer stretch to being something which is actually a 400-kilometer stretch. And through this research, there were points where I started questioning myself that is it really impacting, or is it the kind of image that one would want to know for a 400-kilometer long river, or it is a false notion that we are trying to create. Also, over the decades, many laws and legal frameworks have been formed, but none suggest measures or abide users to protect these edges, like the reserved forest boundaries. In case of rivers, we have a very generic outline which says that 500 meters adjacent to the bank of the river or till the highest floodplain, riparian vegetation should be conserved. But we do not have physical barriers or boundaries like the way we have reserved forest areas inside which you are not allowed to build along the rivers. It is also very pitiful that if we look at the Indian law and legal framework, up and until the National Tribunal Act, which just happened to come up in the 2000s, river was not even referred to as a living water system, but it was referred to as two lines along which the water is passing. Many movements and public forums have been curated, but the core problem has never been focused upon. In terms of basic documentation or research, there has been very few publications and which have undertaken actual empirical work. While I was doing the literature study for kind of finding out data or details for my research, there was a huge lack of cause and effect or associational data. Most of the data was a kind of survey or a kind of counting that was done over a period of time by forest departments or such similar departments or students doing research in botany and other such domains, but very little research from the domains of landscape architecture or similar such backgrounds, which is actually something that they are the ones who are going to actually design these riverfronts. The scope of this research hence focuses upon the impact areas, which is mainly, which you can see in this diagram, which is the part upstream or the part above the riverfront versus the part below the riverfront and its immediate context. Since I'm in the midway of my research, I'll only be briefing you about the site and the area that I'm studying in, and not really the actual fieldwork that I have just began. Maybe I would share that some other time. So this is how I situated the base reference for my study. So this particular image that you see is a map where this is the origin where from the Aravallis where the Sabarmati originates. This marked in red circle is the part where you have the riverfront, and this is the mouth, which is the Gulf of Khambat. And if you actually see, the entire length of this river is 371 to 78 kilometers, and it is only this 23 kilometers that we are always impressionizing the river to be, but it is actually this entire river course. Also, there are some interesting existing landscape archetypes and mosaics which one would find along this river, and that is primarily because of the kind of geological formation of land that has occurred in the entire basin area, where it starts from the mountains in the Aravalli to lower hills closer to Khed Brahma and other parts, to the Dharoi Dam being built in this area where you see this large blob of blue. As we proceed down, there the land is comparatively higher compared to what it comes by the time it reaches the Kotars in Ahmedabad. So you have the formation of the ravines, which are slowly disappearing because of a lot of land use that has changed, a lot of land being leveled, and a lot of sand mining that is actually occurring. To the riverfront, actually, starting from the start or the end along the Ahmedabad city, to its lower parts where you have plains and agricultural fields and scrublands, to the point that it actually has 2 to 3 confluences of various other rivers like Vatrak happening at Vautha and other points, and all the way till it reaches the estuarine. So this is based on the strategic sampling that different existing landscape architects that were observed and transects that were taken. So currently I'm working on each of these transects and doing field work and finding the actual situation of all the landscape elements that are existing and how they have changed over a period of time. Also, it is these locations for which I could manage to find some backend data like archival data where I could get species counts, species type, soil water types, all of those data, but they were all point specific. So what is the way ahead in connecting the research and design? So because of this inquiry, last year we managed to do a studio which was called Negotiating Along Land Water Mediation, which we have retitled it to Living Waterfront. This studio encouraged students to look, especially urban design students, to look at how research and design can get connected, how we can design along rivers in a more sustainable and ecologically favorable manners. Yet the development can happen. We can have public spaces. We can have it actually like an image for the city, but still let the ecology thrive, still let the traces. So it becomes very, very important for students to actually read these patterns of nature. So this is one of the students' work where she had identified points along the river. This is the case of Vishwamitra River actually, but this I'm trying to show only so that we know how design and research can get connected. Is where she saw points where sewage water was entering the river, and through her design, she tried to create conduits of water where water could be treated, the ecology could thrive, as well as development can start happening. Similarly, there was one other student who was trying to modulate ground and create neo-habitats and actually create swales for the river to actually flood and gather all the sediments, create smaller pools for the birds and bees and other animals and other fauna species. And this one more project where she was looking at not really creating a boundary or an edge for a riverfront project, but allowing the lines to swale. Many projects are funded and implemented in the name of restoration, with the implication that improving environmental condition is their primary aim. Thus, project labeled as restoration successes should not be assumed to be actual ecological successes. In the ideal situation, projects that satisfy stakeholder needs and advance the science and practice of river restoration, learning from the success and practice, could become an ecological success. Riverfront development is a matter of interest and concern for most developing countries as it showcases the cultural, social, and economic growth of cities. In this race of development, we have completely missed the importance of rivers flowing naturally and the different processes they associate or support along their course. The current approach to designing in most of the projects is actually not very self-sustaining. Also, there have been recently, like for instance, W4W and a lot of the river, the Living Water Museum, and couple of other such initiatives also where they are supporting research on sustainable practices, traditional knowledge systems to people and varied topics on how traditional knowledge systems as well as these different approaches to designing and dealing with these riverfronts could be encouraged and different perspectives together. So there's a lot of scholarship also which is being built up, which is a very positive part of this entire course of research that is now being taken up. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for being patient and listening.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you so much for the wonderful and very professional and very well-organized presentation. Just a small query before I get into discussing with you on your presentation and the larger subject and the domain of water front developments. When you were mentioning Sabarmati, you were mentioning 23 kilometers where I was imagining that to be both sides of Sabarmati.
Yes.
So in that sense, the actual Sabarmati becomes 748 kilometers or 742 kilometers if we calculate both sides in the longer stretch. So just for this little errata here, so if we calculate the riverfront on both sides, then it is 11.5 multiplied by 2, which is 23 kilometers. And if we calculate the river on both sides, which is 371 multiplied by 2, then it is 742 kilometers. We will come to this later on because I am also trying to really work on the water grabbing scholarship, which is globally very strongly discussed and debated, as well as the fact I'm trying to explore opportunities where Is it possible to really contest the riverfront development because it is grabbing the identity of the river itself? I mean, when we now Google Sabarmati River, for first 10 pages, you only see Sabarmati Riverfront. You don't see information on Sabarmati River. And that's kind of, one thing is killing the ecology of it, but the other thing is actually killing the identity of the river itself by just a tiny stretch of the river. So anyway, we can keep on discussing, because I know your research from the point zero when you started working on this study, because I have been very closely involved in your work. So that gives me a lot of pride to see how far you have advanced from where we started discussing and where you started working on. So also congratulations to you and Aarti for taking this scholarship so far. I think it's already 3 years or 4 years when we are discussing your research. So let me come to the questions now specific to your presentation. I do understand and appreciate when a good researcher really starts talking about her or his research from the point of explaining the concepts. And you also talk about it, giving the background, and once you start talking about your research, you start with defining the concepts. Why do you think concepts become extremely important to really position a research? And should reading landscapes be an integral part of design when we talk about the concepts? I'm seeing reading landscape itself as part of a concept, and then also when we talk about urban ecology and things like that, and even for that matter, riverfront is also a concept. So over to you.
So we generally do research. So I would like to break this question into two parts. One is how it affects design and how it affects research. So generally, when we take up any doctoral or any similar research, it is something that is going to contribute to the larger domain of a particular field. Like in my case, it is about landscape architects, because on the contrary, that a lot of research has happened on rivers from botany, life sciences, such perspective. But we as designers have a very different domain and understanding of these systems. So when we talk about concepts, it does become important to situate your research as to how it is going to contribute your profession, or a profession as we are designers. And from there, I'd like to connect it to the idea of designing, that nature has its trails that it leaves. It has its patterns. And it is these patterns that when we keep observing them over a period of time, they give us hints of areas which will recover on its own, areas which have gone under major alterations, areas which, if left by itself, will recover and will rejuvenate. So I think a conscious designer, and I would like to connect this to architectural practice also, where when we design in a context, for us, the context is the urban context, or the buildings around it, or the people around it, whom we always relate to, that whom are we building this for? In this case, you have an existing natural system, and it is this natural system which is going to give you a lot of hints of where and what can you do. So through this research, I'm also trying to bridge this gap between a set of thinkers who feel you should not do anything along rivers, versus a set of thinkers who feel you should completely alter it and do whatever you want to do. And I feel it is important to yes, to find a middle ground, because and this came because I spoke to a lot of urban designers, a lot of friends and colleagues. So according to them, this land is of prime importance in a city, and their argument was that if you leave it by not doing anything, it is not going to thrive. It is either going to deteriorate further, because a lot of encroachment is going to happen, versus set of ecologists or conscious people who talk about the ecology or nature of the river, who say that don't get into those systems, let them be the way they are, let them live the way they are. So I think there is always a middle ground to kind of connect both of this, and that is how research and design can definitely connect. And it is that which is the concept and those lines that you get, which one should definitely follow.
Okay, wonderful. For all PhD scholars or we researchers who wants to get into starting a new research, I think the concepts become extremely important to position, so that your work is looked through that lens and not the lens which often people are already prejudiced about, or they are already working in, or for example, those who are not in that particular subject area, if they are reading this research, they have to know from which angle this research has to be looked upon. Otherwise, the assessment and understanding of the research becomes extremely different, or interpretation goes in all directions, so that can be subject to unwanted, I will say, not criticism, but misinterpretation. Let me just hold it there itself. You did mention that you have been talking to a lot of urban designers, ecologists, and I'm aware that you are also really look at things like when you talk
Sorry,
about.
can you, there is something unstable with my connection. Can you repeat the question? I mean, I lost your voice
Okay,
in the
sorry.
beginning.
Anyway, my
Yeah.
question did not come, but I was just saying that you
Okay.
did mention about interacting with a lot of urban designers, planners, architects, at the same time of officers, researchers, and people from all other fields like ecologists and other. Because your forte is in looking at the ecology part of it, so you also went on left, right, and center to look at every inch of the river to really find where the data is, so that you can use the data to analyze. In these kind of experiences, what is the difference you find between perspective and perception of rivers among these people, of perspective and perception of rivers in India, for that matter?
So, I mean, specifically defining the two terms, perspective is the different opinions that people have about this particular subject matter or location. And that came primarily through the people involved into design, as you just mentioned, the people from different domains.
Yes.
Perception is the image that did get coined in a lot of places where there was a direct connect between the Western culture, or the way people in the Western part of the world look at rivers as more of it being a very physical, aesthetic, resource kind of a place, which is primarily public centric. Like, it is only and only for people, and in most of the cases we do see that that perception is also something that we have with our rivers, because our culture is a very socio-cultural approach towards river, because we live along these rivers, we practice along this river. There are places where river becomes a trigger to host a lot of melas and other activities and festivals, to it being something which is not just a resource. And I think the perspectives have not really changed, but the perception has definitely changed. And that is affecting the perspective of how people are looking at these natural systems or approaching towards designing along with it, and the research also overall. Because, yeah, I think I would like to kind of sum it up to you there.
Okay, so when you say like this, you are already talking about between perspective and perception, this drift is happening, and to large extent, the perception is influencing the perspective part of it. And in this regard, where do you see, like we have been moving from, from a river to river systems, or river ecosystem for that matter, particularly when we talk about river being more of a social cultural aspect for us since time antiquity, and today when we look at it more, as you mentioned also, for the city part, particularly the urban part, where the land is valued more over the water system per se, where do you see that this shift has really come from? If you can tell me both in the time perspective and, I mean, temporal and spatial.
Yeah.
Maybe case of Sabarmati for that matter. Sure.
Yeah. So I'd like to first pull out a point that when I was doing my literature study and trying to find out secondary sources of information, there was a major shift in the way the research has carried out. So there were points in time earlier when only domains of botany or life sciences who spoke about plant and plant material, and it was, I mean, if I today relate to that data with looking at this natural system, I kind of feel that there is a big jump. That, okay, so the list of trees you find along Sabarmati and you get it in the gazetteer, but you don't know where, you don't know how. Now that is the point which becomes important. So earlier research was in that sense a bit more generic also, because it was looking at the entire river. And now that, we do know that there are like 7 to 8 landscape archetypes which are present along Sabarmati. So the vegetation will differ. You need to break it down into fragments and see a lot of these things. So I think research has shifted. We are now focusing on looking at certain aspects very specifically. And I think when you then say that we connect that to the way we approach these systems for development, there it is like every morsel of land values, like every inch and bit of land along the river values. But I would like to bring in a bit of a personal note here, that like when I was working with these young urban designer students at CEPT, and they are already graduates and now they are going to go in the field. Their primary comment after the studio was, we never looked at rivers this way, because we were not aware that they are these living systems. For us, it is the two lines with water and land next to it, and that's it. So if there is a gap in the academic kind of a bringing or teaching, you cannot expect them to have that sensitivity or sensibility 20 years down the line when they are involved in such projects. Okay, so yeah.
Interestingly, in architecture planning, because we both hail from that background, many a times I'm sure you have also experienced it. When I'm sitting as a jury, I see many a times students not even coloring the river as blue. So, it's just like it does not exist at all.
Yes.
Because we are so land driven,
Yes.
designers or developers, I will say.
Yeah,
That is all about.
you can see. Yeah, you can actually see this in the topographic survey sheets which were done back then, where the river is only hatched with a dotted hatch and actually not colored blue. So it is all about land and nothing else.
So even when we talk about river, and the first thing which comes out is that this is this wide, this is this long, which is actually the land measurement. We really don't start defining river with how many types of fauna, how many types of flora, what kind of, whether this river has more arsenic, more fluoride, more phosphorus, all kinds of things which make the water, river water, more life. So that also makes it very ironic for us to really look at river the way we have been looking at for a long time. And I will say that this is also to do with urbanization, but I need to really dig into a little bit more historical literature to find out when did water bodies become land bodies with water. That's a change in the way. I think it's not more than 100 years when we have started looking at it like that, especially when large infrastructures started coming. You were mentioning about, this shift which has happened, and in your presentation, you were also talking about these two schools of thought. Ecologists will say, keep people away. It's a very simple way to talk about conservation. Then this other school of people, and which is where we hail from, where everything is about development. When we see an empty land, when we see some bushes, we think that, oh, this is a dirty place, it needs to be developed. At this point, before I really ask a question, I have added one slide on your presentation. I'm sorry for this, but I really wish to share this before I ask my next question, so that my question has more impact on what I'm going to say. Do you see this image?
Yes.
This is the most popular image of Sabarmati before and after.
Yes.
And the before can be very well said as leave the river as it is, but that did not mean keep the people away. In fact, there were more people. There is a study which you may be aware that there were more people using this stretch of Sabarmati back then, more animals using the water body as compared to when we see it today, which is the after image. To my shocking surprise, these two images are also in Ahmedabad airport, to give an impression that how the city has developed. How we from our old, dirty look of the river, how we have made it beautiful. This is some kind of, I will say social engineering being tried upon in the citizens' mind.
Yes.
So with this image, let me just stop this and come back to my question here. So my question to you is, when we have these two clear school of schools, and you're talking about finding a middle ground, especially being a landscape architect, where you will definitely be driven to do some development, but more inclined towards ecological oriented development. Where do you see, I am more inclined to the first part now, to be honest, where we can see a lesser intervention of humans on the river. I'm not saying no intervention. Key people, I'm not from the key people.
Yeah. So I'd like to answer that with reference to my current observation,
Yes.
which, I mean, I did take this transect from the point where the riverfront begins, upstream of that, and then the downstream of that. And there were points where I realized that points which are quite closer to the developmental areas had a lot of external agents like sewage treatment, plant water coming into it, and sand mining, a lot of other things happening. There, if the river is left to its own stage, it's going to be a big bit of a problem, because so there is this term in ecology which is called resistance and resistant.
Yes.
And I think it is very important to understand this, because it is only one of this system which has the scope of revival. The other almost gets altered and modified to a newer kind of habitat that happens. So
So how do
up till
so how do
huh,
people understand resistance and resilience in this situation then?
okay, I'll do one thing. Just give me a moment.
Yeah. Because see, we as scholars, especially because PhD is about doctorate in philosophy, we love to
Yeah,
go around philosophies and concepts. But I think it is
definitely.
important that we decode these concepts for the citizen
Yes,
science, and so that people are also taking a look in a more critical way when they look at these systems. Because
yes.
when we take people to Sabarmati, let's say, for in my case, in my walks and all,
Hmm.
when they arrive, they have very different impression, and when after the walk, after 1 hour, there is this complete change of
Nice.
understanding of the river. And this is where perception and perspective I will try to bring from your own presentation.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Maybe meanwhile, participants, if you have any question for her, you can start
Yeah.
posting it in the chat box.
So, yes. So, is my screen visible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, resilience versus resistance, this whole question of regeneration. So, the first term we need to understand is the ecological succession. So, the rate and scope of regeneration and change in the species structure. The stream section below informs the transformation and regeneration that are dependent on how much stress level is impacting over a period of time. And what you see here is a water body. A point up till which we call the floodplains is where you have the tolerance limit. The immediate adjacent bank along these water bodies, which have the scope of regeneration over a few monsoon cycles. So this is the land water mediation edge that I was constantly referring to, that when you do not alter these edges and leave it for the natural system to swale by itself, then it is resilient if it disturbs. Okay, so if you have some kind of mining activity or some kind of removal of some species and things like that, because the water level would keep coming back and go during different monsoon cycles, it is resilient to change and it will cope up by its own. But a point after which is marked red here, a dotted line, is where this system becomes resistant. So the scope of regeneration, even over decades, becomes very, very difficult. This is the point where we have this upland vegetation in terms or in case of rivers. So it is this. So when we say the land adjacent to the rivers which is under development, it is actually from the point where the water stops, this blue point, all the way till there, till the red. So this area we are already putting under development and completely removing everything and making it resistant. And it also is an area which will not have the scope of regeneration. But if we start a development after this one particular point and let this swale all by itself, then the natural system of the river will also keep going, as well as you will have developmental activities. And this whole fact that you are looking to the river and not to a channel which only has water and no vegetation is something that is not a very pleasing sight to look at, other than it just being a water
second most polluted river in the country. And when I'm talking about Sabarmati, actually the stretch which has riverfront is only where the water is for all the year round, and it is the second most polluted river in the country. And at the same time, if you come to that riverfront, you will see those plants or which have never really seen the light of becoming trees, which were supposed to become trees in 10-15 years. They are still like in the shrub stage because they are just unable to grow, despite the fact that they see what those trees see water all the year round, but there is not much water underneath that riverfront, which you were trying to showcase here. So let me just move on to my, I think, last question I will say, and then open it up to all the participants here. Wonderful conversation, Priyanka, and very thoroughly read, and the hard work I can see there. How do you see yourself or your fraternity, particularly focusing on as landscape architects and urban designers, planners, where we all come from, that this kind of research become useful because it's quite domain centric, although you do transcend to go to other domains and look at things, especially when you're talking about aquatic flora and fauna, which is integral part of landscape architecture. But the way I have been witnessing and experiencing landscape, also being practicing for 30 years with my husband, I see that somewhere landscape architects have also been trying to find that middle ground where they don't say no to development, but at the same time they are really kind of trying to do damage control more than doing ecological development. So it's like, okay, you go ahead and do all kinds of nasty things in the name of development, we will come as specialists and we will try to restore a little bit whatever is possible. I mean, I can say this because we are practicing day in and out in the office in that format. So if this is a gap there, in the literature or in the scholarship available on particularly river systems, how do you see that your research can be really a step further to start thinking about it, start talking about it? Because we saw at one point in time where river system changed into river as a infrastructure or as a technical project to work on. And you rightly mentioned in your presentation as well that technology is in our hands, how far we can go and engineer an ecological system, but ecology will take its own time. So what is the added value, especially in the larger domain apart from our domain itself?
Yeah, so there are 2 points. One is the capability of reading landscape. Now, as you just rightly said, that because we are taught certain subjects as a part of our academic, program, we know how to, I mean, not thoroughly, but at least to begin reading landscapes, which the other domains do not. So they definitely depend on the kind of resources that are available. So one is, and this happened also because there are a lot of formulas in sciences like the Shannon Index and couple of others where they do assess biodiversity, they do assess the quality of richness of species and things like that. And before I could develop a framework as a part of my research, I tried and actually did the math for all these calculations. And the primary problem that I felt was that one, there is a big there is a big gap in the kind of data that those formulas expect. Those formula expect data like number of species you saw. Now, if today I saw 10 crows, does not mean that that river edge only has 10 crows. And I'm calculating it at the current point. So I think in terms of that species calculation, those indexes and formulas are quite interesting, but there is a major gap this. And if you actually look at the larger literature in landscape architecture or design domain, you do not have enough frameworks where you can learn to read these landscapes. I think the last of the books that I can actually remember is Design with Nature by Anne McHarg, and that was ages back. I mean,
yes, it's
in
already
2013,
years.
exactly. So in 2013, when I started with my masters, we were referring to that book as a base. But since you have been in practice, is there any other book which helps you to read the current day landscapes in a certain way? Probably yes, probably not. But it is not even something that people want to be aware about. So, developing website for testing. So, you are able to put in certain data. You are able to, kind of trace lines out of it. And this is exactly what we as landscape architects in our academics and then practice are trained to look at. which are the species which are native. So I mean, simple things like native and exotic, or native and wilderness. So a lot of people get confused when they see a lot of prosopis as being natural or native. But is it contributing to biodiversity? Probably not. So I think it is a lot of this kind of little gaps which I, as a practitioner and an academician, felt, which also the literature domain lacks, is where I think my study will really help to kind of start thinking about how this can be taken ahead even further.
Thank you. Interesting. I think it's a good idea to announce or also share with a lot of people here. We have more than 500 architecture planning colleges in the country. And not to my surprise, but to other surprise, we still don't teach water in these schools and colleges. And the amount of water which is taught is through other subjects, and that too how water could be developed, how water could be reached to your house, but not water as an ecosystem. And
Yes.
in a 5 years of architecture, in 2 years of planning and urban design, there is no subject on water. And this is where actually, personally, I started my journey of water. And I still feel sad that the schools of architecture, planning and urban design and landscape architecture are not yet willing to take the waterscape in a very different way. So waterscape becomes very tricky, and it becomes a kind of water development projects. So currently we are having in the pipeline 25 riverfront development projects. If you are aware of, Priyanka, we know 14 are ongoing, but I just heard from one of the public events that 25 riverfronts will be ongoing from very soon, probably before next year election also. So if we are considering Sabarmati Riverfront as a model riverfront in the country, which was the most polluted river last year, but somehow Coam did something in Chennai, and Sabarmati became second most polluted river in the country. So it's we need to really rethink: are we setting the right model for the country? Are we reading the landscape properly? Are we reading the waterscape for that matter? So we will have another session to discuss landscape versus waterscape, because that's where we can have a good conversation as well. So if there are any questions from the participants, we are very happy to take it. And I'm sure Priyanka will be very excited to answer your questions or any suggestions or any comments you have for Priyanka. Okay. Ekta, do you have any question? Because we just saw your dead lake made out of a river in Chandigarh. So we did a lake walk at your river, which is no more a river or no more a lake. So maybe you may ask question.
Yes. So thanks, Priyanka. It's really a very nice presentation, and we learned a lot. Whenever we talk about landscape, it's only the landscape, land, plants, accessories, and all these things, which are all man-made actually. So we never consider that the waterscape is also an important part. Without water, that landscape can also it's not possible for that landscape to exist or flourish. So it's definitely we as a humans, I think we are greedy, and we just do anything for the power and the benefits. So actually, the landscape and waterfronts are not for the benefits. It is for maintaining the ecosystem, natural ecosystem that nature has provided us to live a healthy and happy life. So my question is, as so many lakes, man-made lakes, and all these things are made, and we are redirecting the flow of the rivers also. So as we know very well that redirecting the flow of rivers, as you also explained it, that how it will destroy the deposits. We all know that when rivers start from their origin, they bring in some deposits which are minerals and which are very useful for our development, for our health, as well as the plants and other organizations. Also, there are the marine life, and marine life also get disturbed, but still we are doing it. So how this is there should be the change in the technology, or we should go back to our traditional systems to maintain this natural ecosystem suitable for our marine life as well as the land life.
Yeah. So there are two points to this. The first is when we talk about the practices along rivers, traditionally, the water from the river was looked at as a resource, definitely, but it was something that was time specific. So there was a factor of time, that there were certain activities which happened on daily basis. There were certain activities which happened annually and biannually. So, for example, if there's a fair which happens along the river once in a year and it attracts lakhs of people, it is only once a year, and then there is going to be a monsoon, and then the system is going to have time to revive and re-establish itself. Versus a lot of activities which a lot of villagers do perform, of activities like cremation, or activities like bathing animals and washing clothes and things like that along these river banks, where it was very sustainable earlier with the kind of products and materials that they use, which have now become quite more chemical, made up of chemicals, which is actually polluting these rivers. But their impact on such a large system was very nominal. But when we talk about larger infrastructure and developmental practices which alter large stretch of land, so like an 11-kilometer stretch of land is completely altered, and or a 20-kilometer, so like in case of Mula Mutha River, I was reading that the entire river, from the point it enters the city to it leaves, they are completely transformed into a riverfront. So there is really no scope for the natural system to kind of accept the development, or it's like a wall that you be here, we be here. And I think that way of separating out the system from our lives and only becoming spectators to this system is the primary question of perception and problem, and there it is that it all begins. Additionally, when we say river as a natural system, which is the second point, it has its own way of moving. So it has meanders, it has swales, it has oxbows. So it also becomes very important for people to get educated about these different parts of a river system. Like the way, our heart has so many veins, and if one vein damages, you are going to die. And we are so conscious about that one blockage in the heart. What you are doing to this large water system is actually a blockage. But up and until it is really not affecting our lives, like technically our lives, we are really not bothered about it. And I think that is also what we can see in some of the early examples that I showed you, that the river in Switzerland and the other rivers in Denmark, where they did channelize, and then they realized that this needs to go back, otherwise it is not going to live or sustain, and they created meanders. They let it deposit, they let the pace slow down. Yesterday, I'm a little out of contact, but yesterday I was reading somebody tweet that cyclones could avoid destruction if there are a lot of mangroves. And I had been to Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and many years back, they had seen a tsunami which completely destroyed the landscape. Since then, cutting of mangroves in Andaman is banned, because they know that it is only these mangroves which will protect our island, or we all will die. So I think, I mean, it's a very sad situation, but till the time we don't feel that this is actually going to kill us if we don't, if we don't really move. I think that, but I see the positive side of that, where and that's also through the design studios and through our teachings or whatever academics that we work on, that instead of changing what people think, it is important to inculcate this into people who are growing, because they are like, I took my son along with me to Sabarmati, all the locations, and he kept telling everybody, I went for Sabarmati Parikrama, and everybody was, he's just 4, and everybody's like, you went for Parikrama, and I kind of grained into his mind that it is a river, it's a natural system, you need to walk along it, and he actually walked with us. So I think if at that age he also learns this value of natural system, I think it is the future that we are really looking up to.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
May I just add? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I would like to point out one more location here, and which was I visited Sahasradhara in Dehradun 96, and that was a beautiful place. So many waterfalls were there, small tributaries. But then within a decade, I visited again, and that was full of so many restaurants and all, and there was no any Sahasradhara. So now, when we were in the session, I thought that water must be somewhere. So because if previously in 96 there was so much water, so now where that water is?
Yeah.
It must be somewhere, and it has been blocked due to this construction and these things. So it may be hazardous anytime. It can be a calamity anytime, but we are just focusing on the development, that we should have the facilities and the comfort level, but we are not able to understand that the how natural ecosystems are necessary for our survival. So there must be some rules and regulations, and by the
Yeah.
government as well as from the people also, because only the government can't do. We people have to be very conscious to
Yeah.
conserve our natural systems. So this is the just one example, but lot of examples in the whole country, even in the whole um, a planet, where we are disturbing the natural system, natural flow of water. Landscape can never be complete without taking care of other water bodies. So
True.
all the air, water, and soil systems are connected, and we have to be very conscious consumer, conscious human beings, because this earth is not for us. A lot of people or other organisms, we are destroying the homes for them.
Yeah.
So I
Let,
think,
may I just add
yeah,
something
sure.
here, Ekta? Thank you. Maybe we invite Pallavi Goyal. Do you want to add something here? Because I see you have a little bit point here in the chat box. Yeah. Uh, and meanwhile, I just want to again stress upon the fact that we are not teaching water in architecture, urban design, planning. And I stress on this because that's why Wednesdays for Water, Friday Waters was started, because I was really looking for how to teach water across the discipline and other disciplines as well. So now we are quite blessed to get many people from all other disciplines, all other domain, including architecture, landscape, and planning, where people come and talk to us about water. So water can really connect all disciplines and all domains, I must say, that's required. When you talked about parikrama, it really helped me to understand why you're talking about water education for the younger generation is crucial, because if they learn, then only they are going to practice it that way. Having said that, if we are destroying it so much at this point in time, probably their learning of today will require to unlearn a lot of things and probably undo a lot of things, which I say many a times that future is about
Yeah.
de-development or undoing the wrong
Yeah.
things which my generation and your generation and my previous generation already did a lot of wrong things, and our future generation may be just busy undoing a lot of things, breaking these things. And I want to bring to your notice here regarding Sabarmati Riverfront Development here, because Priyanka is doing her PhD, so she has her limitations to do tell a lot of things, but I am not doing PhD, so I can talk about it. Sabarmati as model has not only been expanded to all other riverfronts in the country, but it is going to be extended within Ahmedabad, and the riverfront is going to reach to Gandhinagar. The project is already approved for another 5.5 into 2,
Yeah.
so both sides another 11 kilometers with
Okay.
a huge budget. At the same time, when this project was getting approved, there was a case in High Court where a high level committee has already submitted the report to the High Court, where they have actually recommended to break many parts of the Sabarmati riverfront, and they have alarmed the court to not repeat Sabarmati riverfront blindly, not only extending it to Gandhinagar, but to all other riverfronts in the country. It is my duty as an educator to inform the citizens about these things, because many people do not come to know about it. So if things are happening after these kind of committee reports, we have to see that we can, as human beings, rightly mentioned by Ekta, that we cannot be, it's not about being ignorant or naive. First time when we did Sabarmati riverfront, we may say that there was certain mistakes. But if men in the society are unwilling to accept mistake, instead of that, they are actually going ahead to multiply that mistakes to many cities. It does not remain mistake anymore. It
Yeah.
becomes a criminal activity. So I really wanted to put this point here on this session, because it's about Sabarmati Riverfront project, and I do understand a researcher's limitation to not cover these things, and her focus is more on the ecology part of it, and I wanted to bring this political ecology part of it, because if this is getting multiplied in so many cities, it is also meaning that so many rivers are getting death threat already in advance, and they are going to face this. And the last point I want to bring to all of you from my own work, also having supervised students and also working on it on Sabarmati now, the identity of these rivers are seriously at a stake. As I mentioned in the beginning, that only 11 into 2 kilometers, which is 23 kilometers, if it can grab the identity of 742 kilometers, you can imagine if this is going to happen for 25 cities and 25 rivers in the country. I will just request all of you to please go and just Google the amount of money put in the Sabarmati riverfront and the amount of money put in the river upstream of the riverfront and river downstream of the riverfront. You will understand what I am saying. So there is a discrimination even within the river, even within the city and all. And I think I can go on and on. I'm very emotional about this project because I'm against this project. So over to you, Ekta.
Thank you, Mansee. Very well said that first, second, and third mistake is a mistake, and after that, it is a crime. So, and there should be the strict law for the crime against nature. So, crime is like an epidemic, and we have already spreaded it a lot. So, from generation to generation. So, it's time to find out the ways to control this epidemic and control proper legal ways to stop this crime against the nature. Thank you all for joining us today for this session. Join us for the next Friday water session on 23rd June at 5 p.m. on Watertalks. We will meet with Subodh Mishra on Haath To Dholo. Please also join us for the next Wednesday for water on 21st June at 5 p.m. IST for the Riverscape series on holistic approaches in water heritage documentation with Nishant Upadhyay as a moderator. Also, don't forget to join us on every third Friday for the Thesis Club. Let's learn from our scholars as well as motivate them for their research so that these research can be documented and well implemented for the benefit of the society as well as for the future generations. Thank you.